Hello, everybody. Welcome to the third lesson. We're going to talk about abstract nouns, past tenses, and a few other things, and even a story or two. So let's get right into it. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to start with the presentation of the book. So, do you remember is the title, and the reason that's the title, I suppose, is because we're going to focus on the grammar aspect of past, in the past. And we're going to look at 3 or 4 tenses that we all are familiar with. But I think what we're going to find is when we really probe deeply, when you probe deeply, you examine or look deeply into something, into detail. When you probe deeply, you're going to find that you don't use all of them very often. We're going to come back to Ingrid Bergman. She has an interesting quote, "Happiness is good health and a bad memory." We'll come back to that at the very end. All right, so I'm going to start with the reading. I'm not going to read to you, but what I am going to do is highlight some of the difficult words. Now, just as an overview, the first reading talks about a writer whose childhood experiences have influenced their writing as a fiction novelist. And so this is Roald Dahl. And so he talks a little bit about his background. All right. And what I want to focus on is some of these highlighted words and maybe talk about them. So we're going to get our... All right. So here we have all with numbers, the chocolate bars here, you can see, the chocolate bars of chocolate, all with numbers from 1 to 12 stamped on the chocolate underneath. Now, I think all of us know stamped is something if you go to the post office, oftentimes they'll stamp your parcel, P-A-R-C-E-L. I'm gonna introduce a lot more vocabulary today, or at least I'm gonna write it down, so this might be helpful. A parcel is a box as opposed to just a letter, but they stamp your letter or your parcel. But you can also, there are other ways to sort of understand stamp. We can do it metaphorically, a stamp of approval. You don't physically stamp something, but you say, "I agree," or "I support that idea," or "that candidate," or "that person." So you give them your stamp of approval. All right, there's a derivative, and I'm actually not sure how closely related etymologically this is, but stampede. So if you'd add an E at the end, stamped becomes stampede. And if you might not know this, but this is when lots of people just sort of move in one direction, and oftentimes it ends in tragedy. So there have been times at Mecca, there have been times at different sporting events where there was a panic and everyone rushed to the exit or somewhere, and there was a stampede, and unfortunately people were trampled to death. Trampled, not a very nice concept, but trampled is what we have here, is to be stepped on. All right, let's move to the next, blank. Now, blank is interesting. If you look, it's the next highlighted word here, look right here, as 2 blank columns. Now, blank columns mean empty columns. I think a lot of us know this, but we have an expression in English that's quite interesting. I'm drawing a blank. So if somebody asks you a question, or you're trying to remember a particular event, you can't, you say, "I'm drawing a blank. I can't remember." Now, blank is not that far distant to not. Not is the British equivalent of 0. So in American English, they use 0, and in British English, it's generally not. Let me move that over here. Now, the Americans also will spell this not. So two different spellings, I think that's right, but they have the same meaning. Not means nothing or zero, literally nothing, and also zero. Now, there's an expression that I want to make you aware of. It came to naught. This is probably more American based on the spelling. It came to naught. So, we taught, basically it means it came to nothing. Nothing happened from it. So we were in discussions to merge our companies or to form a partnership, but at the end, it came to naught. Nothing happened. All right. I highlighted sensible because for some of us, we still get confused between sensible and sensitive. So let's talk about those. We were of a sensible age. Sensible means using common sense, or you could say logic or reason. Good judgment, let's say. Good judgment. Lots of, close synonyms here. Sensitive, on the other hand, is when you're very affected emotionally by something. So, don't talk about her time in Italy. She's very sensitive about it. Maybe she had a bad experience and she will, or he might be emotional. So they're very sensitive. So it's prone to emotion, great emotions. So this is positive or negative. If someone's a sensitive listener, it means they feel you. They understand the emotions that you are feeling as you speak. So they're a sensitive listener. They're not a sensible listener, and not really. We would never collocate it that way. That's sensible, meaning that sounds good. That sounds fair. All right. Now, gusto. This is, I think, comes from Spanish or Italian. It's a Latin origin. But if you do something with gusto, you do it with great passion or energy. And this is not a common, it is sort of used, but it's not one that some of you won't be familiar with it. It's right here, with great gusto. So this is a nice word to use, and we've borrowed it directly from the Spanish and the Italians. I think more Spanish. Gustare or gustar, me gusta, I like, is probably where it comes from. And then, of course, the Latin. Air of. So if something, this is a very common expression that you want to know about because it's used in many different circumstances. So air of something means it has an outward appearance of. So we have an air of luxury. So it looks very luxurious. So anything that you say resembles something, you can use air of. This is connoisseur. Connoisseur is someone with great taste, often with food or wine or art. You have art connoisseur, you have food or also drink. And of course, this is French. So we've borrowed the French here. So we have an Italian gusto and a French connoisseur. And the British and the American are pretty similar in their pronunciation of this. All right. Subtle, I put down because some of you are teachers and your students will inevitably have a difficulty with pronunciation. Everyone wants to say subtle or something. They want to pronounce the B, but of course it's silent. Subtle. Subtle is very small or slight, maybe slight. That's a very subtle difference. So the most common collocation will be there's a subtle difference. A subtle difference is a very small difference that most people might not be aware of. It's a subtle difference. A nuance is also something you can use as an equivalent. And palate is that part of the in your mouth at the top. And we often relate it to tasting food. Tasting food or drink. Again, we're dealing with food here with Cadbury, so chocolate, food and drink. But it's pleasing. This is the common collocation, pleasing to the palate. If something is pleasing to the palate, you will probably have it again very soon. All right, those are some words and some explanations that I thought could be of benefit. So under the section of habitual events and specific incidences, we're going to look at used to and would. So we've got that here. Now, what is very nice, when you're going to use this book, just as a reminder, the examples 1, 2, and 3 are followed up by grammatical explanations. So 1 and example or subpoint 1 deal with these examples. So it's a great, I think, very methodical in how they've produced this. So I want to draw your attention to these grammatical points, and then we'll produce our own examples. And then, of course, you'll have homework. We often use used to plus infinitive as an alternative to the past simple to talk about things we did repeatedly in the past. So we all know that we use simple tense to talk about repeated actions, but we can also use used to. Now, we can use used to plus infinitive to talk about situations or states which have changed. I used to have much longer hair when I was younger. This implies that I no longer have long hair. So that there's that important distinction, which I think a lot of you understand intuitively or instinctively, but I want to draw your attention to that idea. Now, here we go with number 2. We use would plus infinitive as an alternative to used to talk about things that we did repeatedly in the past. Now, we don't use would with stative verbs to talk about situations or states which have changed. So I would have much longer hair when I was younger. We would never say that. I used to have much longer hair, but not I would have. We use would with activities, actions. We don't use would without a time reference. This is really important. I would play the violin. You can say, I used to play the violin. We know it was an earlier time, but the same assumption doesn't apply to would. We have to have the time element. I would play the violin each summer as a teenager. Then it's fine. We have an element of time there, and now would is appropriate. Now, finally, we have always plus past continuous. We can also use always plus past continuous to talk about things that happen, especially when they were irritating habits. That's a slight nuance, a subtlety, use a word we just introduced earlier. That's a subtlety that I think that is, I think, worth noting. Now, before I go back to the PowerPoint, my presentation, I just want to note in the box, we don't want to confuse used to and be or get used to. And again, most of us know this, but it's worth reminding ourselves as well. Our students, and I know a lot of us are teachers, students will inevitably fall into this trap or confusion. So we can say we used to live in London, but we're still getting used to something. So that's a different thing. So used to is the state or repeated actions. Be or get used to means to get familiar with something. I'm getting used to living in this city. I'm getting used to working in my new job. I'm getting used to working in the new atmosphere, new environment, new job. So this is to become familiar with. So make sure that you don't confuse those. Used to, past actions, be or get used to is become familiar with. All right, you're going to have an ample, ample's a nice word, A-M-P-L-E, ample opportunity to practice these for homework. But I'm going to go to the presentation and just go over one more time so that you all understand, then we'll do one together. the difference. So let's do baseball, because I played baseball as a kid in the US. It was very popular. So I used to play baseball as a teenager. That's fine. You can also say I played baseball as a teenager, simple past. When you say I played baseball as a teenager, we don't know. It's more or less the same. I used to play baseball. We don't know how long. Now look with would, though. We can't say I would play baseball as a teenager. Honestly, it sounds to me awkward. In the summer, as a teenager, I would play baseball. Summer, to me, you have an anchor, a time anchor. Anchor is A-N-C-H-O-R. We use those to drop. If we're in the water, we anchor our boat so it doesn't move. We need this time anchor, and I think summer provides it even more than teenager. In the summer, as a teenager, I would play baseball. If I just said I would play baseball as a teenager, I don't know, it sounds slightly off to me. It's too general. I'm not sure I would ever use that sentence. I was always playing baseball in the summer, or I was always playing baseball as a teenager. You can use both options with always. Here, this sort of is a hybrid, and I think it fits both. So take your pick. Now, why do we bring this up? I know that most of you listening understand here how these are used, but I want to ask you, you can ask yourself, I want to challenge you, do you actually use this in your own spoken English? So the challenge when we actually start to have our conversations and discussions is to begin to use these different things. Let me tell you why. It's not just about learning how to use always with present, past continuous, or would in the same fashion, but it starts to put you in the habit of expanding your active vocabulary. Again, most of us have quite a large passive vocabulary because we've studied a lot. But what this course is partly designed to do is push that from the back to the passive to the active. So I want you to actually start using these constructions in your conversations, in your chats with me, with in our lives, and with your group mates during the speaking exchange or speaking practice. Now speaking of practice, let's do it. Let's say you studied French when you were a teenager. Now, if you're only a teenager and listening to this, and there are a few that are, then when you were much younger. So in the past, you studied French. I would like you to think of the sentence. You can pause the video, think of the sentence for each with used to, would, and always. So pause the video, think of your own sentences, and I'm going to now show you my examples. All right, I used to study French in high school. So we have that time element, high school. I didn't actually, I studied Spanish. I would speak French every summer as a teenager on our family holidays. Again, would, I think, requires a more specific time denomination or delineation. We want to get fancy. And then finally, I was always speaking French on family holidays. Good. If you have questions about that, we can discuss this during the live. Now, the final section of the chapter is on abstract nouns, and you're going to have some homework related to that. The book does a good job of discussing this. I'm going to discuss it in a slightly different way, so not very different, but a little bit. So let's just look at it. Abstract nouns are ideas that name things you cannot see, hear, touch, smell, or taste. They are ideas or feelings or qualities or concepts such as love, anger, freedom, beauty, power, and justice, and many others. And these are different from concrete nouns. Concrete nouns are things you can perceive with all of your one of your senses. So this is a pen is a concrete noun. Our phone is a concrete noun. This laptop that I'm speaking on is a concrete noun. All right. Now, what we're going to do is just show you ways in which abstract nouns are formed. Now, before we do that, I think it's important to know why we're even talking about this. Isn't this just another exercise in suffixes, things you add to the end of words that change the formation and their quality? Yes, it is. But I want to submit to you that it's actually also something very interesting from a learner perspective. Whether you're a teacher or just a student, I want you to consider the following. When you introduce, either to yourself as a student or to your students as a teacher, the concept of abstract nouns, you are introducing a different way of thinking. It's not just dealing with grammatical structures, excuse me, but now we're also peering or peeking into how students or you think. Some of us are more abstract in our thinking than others. And as a teacher, one of my highest callings for you all is to identify your strengths and, on the contrary, your weaknesses. Because if you know where you're strong, then you can emphasize that and even make a career out of it perhaps in the future. And students don't always instinctively know where they're strong. Now they see their test scores and they can see, well, I'm pretty good in that. But beyond a general sort of judgment, they don't know much of the particulars. And as a teacher, I think one of my callings, is to understand in greater detail how people think and what they're naturally good at. So abstract, I can tell you, abstract nouns and abstract anything will come easy for some and difficult for others. And then there's a lot of people in the middle like me. So you sort of get to it. But for me, it took a bit of work because my mind is more logical than it is abstract. But that's the challenge. And I think that's the beauty of language as well. So we're not just dealing with grammar here, we're dealing with concepts and how people naturally think. So, but let's, for the moment, look at verbs. I'm going to talk about how we change verbs, nouns, and others to abstract nouns. Now, a great exercise, and one we might do later, is just to try to, we might do it during the live, is just to, try to think of a few abstract nouns. And what you're going to find is that you're going to think, oh my gosh, is that abstract or concrete? Because there's a lot in the middle that gets a little bit hazy. Hazy, for example, hazy means unclear. H-A-Z or Z-Y. So is the term hazy, is that a concrete or abstract noun? So we'll discuss this, but let's look at some of the grammatical formations. You can see here M-E-N-T, T-I-O-N, A-N-C-E, and A-L. These are suffixes, and these help form abstract nouns. Now, let me just tell you so that it becomes a little bit clearer. There aren't many concrete nouns that you can change. I'm sorry, there aren't many concrete verbs or nouns that you can change into abstract. There are a few, but there aren't many. Inform becomes information. Govern, government. So the verb to govern, government is an abstract noun. We see the building, the Capitol building in the US, or Parliament in London, or anywhere else in the world where you see a government building, but the concept of government is something, you can see a government official, but the concept of government is rather more abstract. Decision, we see the results of a decision, someone goes to jail. Jail is a concrete noun, but decision isn't, it's abstract. And we add it with C or S-I-O-N. Approve, I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. Approve becomes approval. And accept, acceptance. So you can see the endings of the abstract nouns. Let's move on to adjectives. Adjectives, there are a lot of them because a lot of them reveal some sort of emotion that you can't quite quantify. Kind becomes kindness. active becomes activity, free becomes freedom. Now, O-M at the end is really interesting, and I think we probably won't deal with that until the advanced plus group, but the O-M is not common, but it's often used to form new words, neologisms. Fandom, F-A-N, a fan we all know of, someone who's a great supporter. Fandom, D-O-M, then becomes this, D-O-M is the ending there, or O-M, becomes a new word. And a lot of new words are created by using this O-M, actually. All right, or D-O-M. Nouns. Nouns, from concrete nouns to abstract nouns. Now, this is interesting. So, brother is a concrete noun because we can see him, but brotherhood isn't. And brotherhood is this sort of community of men who are united for some cause or principle. Friendship, you can't see friendship, but you see it, but you can't see it, and that's friendship is abstract. Hero becomes heroism, and stoicism. Stoic is someone who is sort of withholds emotion, restrained from emotion. Restrain is a good word. Hold back from showing much emotion. The Stoics, it was a philosophical movement back in the Roman times and the Greek times. Stoicism, this ability to rein, R-E-I-G-N, rein in your emotions. To rein in your emotions means to control them. And finally, there are a few, not many, where abstract nouns don't need to be changed. Love is both a verb and an abstract noun. To love and love. Love is everlasting. Love is eternal. At least that's how it appears if you are married in the United States, and it's signified by the ring, which is never ending. Faith and trust are two other abstract nouns, very important in our life, but not something you can put on the table, only symbolically. The ring is a symbol of love, so that's concrete. And so we often have concrete symbols for the abstract nouns. A ring is one of those symbols of the abstract. All right. I'm going to end, I think, let's just go ahead and check. I'm going to end with the quote I mentioned before. Ingrid Bergman was a Swedish actress born in the 1910s, as I recall. She said this, and this is at the very beginning of this chapter: happiness is good health and a bad memory. Do you agree with that? We can discuss that during our next live. But for her, it was true because, well, I think for all of us, if we're not healthy, we're not very happy. I think that's clear and true for all of us. Sickness or illness, it spoils or ruins our happiness. Bad memory is interesting. Ingrid Bergman lost both of her parents when she was young. And then she lost her aunt, who she went to move in with. So 6 months after she lost both parents, she lost her aunt. And so she lived with another aunt with 4 kids, and she had a very difficult early teens. This is around 12 to 14. Now, there's another thing that's interesting about Ingrid Bergman, which I think can be held up as a mantle or as a paradigm. Paradigm is a nice, I think, Greek word. A paradigm for all of us, a inspiration. First, she was female, and she did things that most people, men or women, didn't do at this time. She moved countries. She studied in Germany. She was fluent in Swedish and German, and then also pretty good in English. But she perfected her English in the US and then learned Italian. So she learned 2 foreign languages and worked in these languages. And I think this is the goal for some of us, is to eventually work in a foreign language, just like Ingrid Bergman. Now, she, as the Swedish and German tradition suggests, she had a handle or a grip on English, but she had a very strong accent. And so she underwent a lot of accent training to lessen or lighten the accent so it didn't sound so Germanic. And when you hear her in Casablanca, this is Casablanca here, one of the most famous films, one of the best films ever produced in Hollywood. I would recommend it. It's a very touching film. She has a great role here. You don't hear an accent. And this is a great inspiration here. So, Ingrid, this class is for you. We're going to improve our English. Perhaps some of us will improve our pronunciation as much as you did to win some of the best roles. And I'll just finish. She went to Italy and learned Italian and starred in Italian films for about 5 years. She married an Italian producer. That would help. But so she had quite an interesting career, and language is at the bottom or core of it. So this should be quite an inspiration for us. All right, you'll have homework. Happy studying, and I'll speak to you very soon. Bye-bye.